Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Spencer Museum of Art. We're so excited to be hosting the 2019 Digital Forum, which has been wonderful. So thank you so much for everyone's hard work, especially Brian and Sarah and the planning committee. It's been an awesome day, and you're still going. I am Joey Orr. I'm curator for research here at the Spencer Museum, and after the keynote here, there'll be a reception just outside the door. There'll be a bar, and there's also some food in the flex space if you follow the lobby around. The main doors will also be open to the exhibition Knowledges, and I just want to point out that there are a few artists who are definitely trafficking with digital technologies, really explicitly, Fatima Tugar and Danielle Roney, but also in a different kind of way, Asaf Evran. I curated the exhibition and I'll be around, so if anyone has questions or wants to talk about that, happy to. That's it. We're glad you're here. Welcome.
Thanks, Joey, and I'd like to just thank the Spencer Museum for not only for this for hosting this event, but also for the extraordinary work they've been doing recently and the beautiful projects that they've curated. So I was really excited when Brian and his colleagues told me that they were going to invite Denisa Kera to this event. Extraordinarily interesting philosopher and designer who's experimenting with all kinds of creative strategies for public engagement and for new ways of thinking about emerging science and tech issues. So she uses the methods from design, from anthropology, from ethnography, and prototyping to think about questions in science, technology, and society very broadly. So she's currently the Marie Curie Research Fellow at the University of Salamanca, which is a pretty awesome title, I think, to be right. Before that, she worked as faculty at the National University of Singapore, I take it for a decade. Yeah, nice place to be. Was faculty of future design in the Prague College of the Arts, and has been a visiting faculty member at Arizona State, where she's continuing to collaborate as a member of the Center for the Study of the Future. She's currently working on blockchain and its applications, and this, of course, is a topic of great interest here at KU. We have a lot of work on this topic. So Kera uses prototypes to rethink not only the history of science, but also to think about future scenarios that are related to emerging technologies. So she thinks of prototypes as ways of critically probing the possibilities and pitfalls of new technologies. And she also has this sort of public engagement piece of her work, and she sees these prototypes, and some of which she'll talk about during this, presumably today and also on Saturday, as ways of stimulating public deliberation and reflection and participation in science and technology. So her activities, we could take them to be reviving a kind of spirit of tinkering that we saw in, let's say, in early modern or pre-modern science. But there's always an eye in her work to democratizing science and supporting research and development in the global south, and doing this in creative and stimulating ways. So Denisa Kera has, tons of experience as a curator with projects related to arts, technology, and science, and has had an actual practical pre-academic life in internet startups and journalism. And so, we're in for a real treat today, this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Denisa Kera to KU.
So thank you for this very generous introduction. This is a bit high for me. and to Brian and Sarah for organizing this, and for the whole team for really, like, we have lectures, movie screening, performances, everything. So as someone who organizes, I know how stressful and difficult it is. And thank you for coming to this a bit strange presentation that has a very monstrous title, as you noticed. And the reason for this title is it's equally strange and persistent metaphor that connects justice and magic, our social practices and contract law with processes and powers that are not human and are increasingly becoming technological. I will discuss how these pacts, covenants, and contracts lead directly to the present fantasies of something called smart contracts, smart cities, trustless blockchain systems, predictive analytics that we just talked about a half hour ago, and various forms of algorithmic governance, which I decided to call justice machines. I hope I'll explain later why. Yeah, there are the slides, you can see them, all the notes. You can also comment, by the way. This metaphor of a pact with the devil is in a certain way omnipresent in our imagination of future technologies today. As you probably know, also in digital humanities, there is this famous quote where Moretti compares digital humanities that all they need is basically this like little pact with the devil. Like all pacts with the devil, we are promised an automatic knowledge and power beyond human agency, beyond our ability to read in this case. Moretti's pact with the devil brings a superpower of a distant reading that promises to upgrade or even save humanities. All we have to do is to move away from what is perceptible, understandable to human mind, in this case text, and embrace the certainty, objectivity of data, signals, algorithms, and code, or something that operates outside of human will, understanding, but also our ability to negotiate. This strange legal idea of a pact, deal, and contract with entities that are infra, sub, superhuman, such as devils, code, and data, is beyond all fantasies of automation. And we are promised autonomous systems with ethics and rules on the level of code, smart contracts that will augment and maybe replace our legal contracts, etc. This myth of automation is becoming the dominant trope of how we imagine and talk about the future. And it is not just the future of digital humanities, but also the future of various infrastructure, governance, politics, even life. So you could often hear now that blockchain is this future internet or future of governance and so on. First, I'll explain why these pacts with the devil are a symptom rather than a cure, and after discussing their genealogy a bit, I will make a case for a different type of research and practice on the border of design and humanities, and also invite you to a workshop. So, what do I mean by these pacts with the devil, or why I'm using this metaphor? Here is maybe an example. I don't know how many of you have tried image roulette? Yeah? Okay, you missed it. So this is how a pact with the devil look like, basically. This is me as interpreted by something called Imagenet, which is the largest visual database of something like 20,000 categories, and I forgot like 15 million of images or something, that gives you a superpower to identify anyone based on his or her face. So this piece of database identified me as a weirdo. I know you probably can see it. Weirdo and something even more worse. Trevor Paglen, this amazing artist I admire, used the person category in that database to create an interface called Imagenet Roulette, which you could use till, I think, September 27, that anyone can use and test his images with this large database and basically figure out what the database think about them. But because of his criticism and criticism of other people, actually Imagenet scrapped some of the data that were problematic. So now you cannot test it and play with that. So now, personally, I find this funny, amusing, and I even threw a bit in my case. I identified it like a weirdo. So my immediate reaction to this was like when you get a tarot card reading. You identify on some level, you can't help it. And I was using this image roulette with my friends on Facebook, and we were trolling each other. Would I feel comfortable that this type of technology was used in the hiring process, or next time I apply for a visa? Probably not. But it is actually hard to know who is using Imagenet, or maybe something more sinister, to make decision about my life. And it is this moment when you realize that we need governance and regulation of these technologies. So my challenge is, what is an efficient and appropriate way to regulate emerging technologies that we even don't know who is using or what stage they are, because many of them are actually proprietary? Is it enough to just stream the data set, create some form of a certification process for this type of software and technologies? Should there be a regulation that penalizes misuse when we notice, and so on? The fantasy about automation over signals, data, algorithm, code convincingly claims to give us a better knowledge and power. But what about justice? Can we design justice machines in the same way we introduce automation in other aspects of our life, such as reading, shopping, dating, and so on? So a classical criticism why this is not possible, and why Pacts with the devil are basically a symptom of a conflict between our concepts and practices of knowledge, power, and justice, or between thinking, acting, and let's say living together, is this quote. It's first time that I saw it. It was mentioned by Evgeny Morozov, who is, I would consider him one of these very vocal critics of algorithmic governance. And he basically was able to show with this quote that our desire for automated justice machines or some trustless systems, such as blockchain consensus mechanisms, smart city scenario, and so on, is basically just a version of this 1934 T.S. Eliot quote about a system so perfect that no one will need to be good, to which we can add also a system so perfect that no one will need to read or even make decisions. So the central question is whether and how can we do justice over signals, data, algorithms, consensus mechanisms in case of blockchain technologies. And I will not give you the answer that you may expect, and I definitely don't plan to defend some notion of traditional, emancipatory, nor even digital humanities or governance. I actually work with such pacts with the devil, smart contracts over the blockchain, how I call them, a bit as a designer and developer, but I also reflect them and write about them, I hope as a philosopher. It was very generous that you called me a philosopher. I'm not 100% certain. And I also offer these prototypes I built in workshops to cooperate and engage others to rethink the future or realize what is at stake. So I do enjoy exploring these fantasies of future infrastructure and automation, but I also have many doubts. And for these doubts, strangely, I read text, and I read them in a very old-fashioned way, very close reading, rather than that Moretti's way. But to make decisions about these technologies, to understand how to regulate them, I really need to involve others in the design process of such promissory infrastructure, in the prototyping, and not only in the discussion. And that's also an invitation for the workshop. So I am concerned, like many of you probably, about this present conflict between our ideas of knowledge, power, and justice. And I don't want to serve justice by becoming a barrier, nor do I want to serve knowledge and science by insisting on their absolute powers. What I know and what I value exists and develops in a social and technological context, so why reduce it to just one side? The main challenge of the prototypes I built in the workshop is basically how to reconcile the social and technological context, our signals, data, algorithms, with human experience, meaning, which could be individual, but also history and politics, which is much more a collective decision process. I even think that this type of a conflict and discussion or experience is the most important challenge of humanities today. Sorry, I didn't realize. This was the quote. I was a bit late with the slide. It's basically about dreaming about a system that is so perfect so no one needs to be good. So to explore further this pact with the devil, or this myth of automation, this idea that automation is a panacea for everything, where does it come from? I claim it is the idea of the early ideas of pacts with the devil. And it's also maybe the first moment that we are introducing this conflict between knowledge, power, and justice. So I'll use a typical legend about these pacts with the devil. It is about a 10th century saint, Wolfgang, who hired a devil to build a church that he envisioned in his heart. Building a church in the 10th century was like introducing a new infrastructure, something like the internet or electrification, or in our nowadays context, blockchain. And the goal of this new infrastructure was, of course, to resolve all human problems. The main problem back then was the salvation of souls and the need to convert the masses of some Germanic, Slavic, and other savages and pagans into Christianity. So it was saving the souls. All our pacts with the devil have something to do with building a new infrastructure, a promissory technology, a hybris, some form of something impossible to build. If Saint Wolfgang lived today, he would probably go to a VC and brag about something like zero-knowledge protocols that improve the blockchain consensus mechanism, or maybe so-called DAGs, directed cyclic graphs, technologies to disrupt something. But in his time, it was a cathedral and the business of saving souls. Now, the conversation between Saint Wolfgang and the VC forces of his time, the devil, starts with a little provocation. So the devil wonders, "Oh, you really want me to build you the cathedral, the house of God," he says. And Wolfgang says, "Yes, I do." And what continues is basically something of a 10th century trolley problem. So the devil says, "I consent, but mark, the first soul that enters, it must be mine." You probably heard similar legends. So what do you think? Did Saint Wolfgang agree to this contract and arrangement of giving that one soul for the benefits of the thousands that he will save with his cathedral? Anyone? Yes? Of course he did. The devil even continues teasing him, and first he says, "Oh, are you certain you want to sacrifice all these souls for one?" And then he says something, "Oh, come on, don't be such a hypocrite. Of course, it's people would sacrifice one individual even if it was much less in stake." So what Wolfgang did basically, he was willing to sacrifice justice for the power and knowledge that the devil performs, for him building this amazing infrastructure. What is also interesting about this story is that the devil is described like an amazing craftsman. He knows everything about the material, and the way he works is without words. So he's like this super powerful craftsman, and he builds this amazing cathedral that is very beautiful and so on. So how do you think this early story about the clash of utilitarianism and deontology actually ends? Strangely, no one gets hurt, because when he opens the cathedral, some hunter is hunting a wolf, and the wolf is the first creature that enters the cathedral. And of course, Saint Wolfgang sees this as a sign that the God was on his side when he allowed him to do this deal with the devil. And the wolf is such an evil creature that his soul does belong to hell. So he gives the wolf soul, and it's like a win-win. Okay. I'll continue with something that we can describe as the modern version of this legend. This is the modern legend about the pact with the devil, which we do not know how it will end. It is about a cathedral that will save the masses from the pagan inefficiencies of bureaucratic and governance systems. It's the blockchain and smart contracts. The Saint Wolfgang in our present story is Nick Szabo, a famous cryptographer, the father of cryptocurrency, who coined the term smart contracts. And he may have invented Bitcoin, which he repeatedly denies. Just like Wolfgang's pact, Szabo's smart contracts and ideas of automation and algorithmic governance depend on a powerful force that doesn't talk. It's hashes, blocks, and mining that do this magic and create something we can only dream about, impossible infrastructure that will save humanity. While the old devil is about the knowledge of materials and processes to build a cathedral, this new one is about powerful cryptography, distributed computing, and sharing of a ledger. But just like in that 10th century story, some souls will have to be sacrificed. In the blockchain case, it will be the accountants and lawyers that will lose their jobs to this vending machine-like mechanism called smart contracts. Szabo, like Wolfgang, also hopes that this trade-off of justice for knowledge and power will only create more justice in the long run. That we are actually sacrificing only something that was bad from the start, some type of a bureaucratic wolf or inner enemy, something that is not useful to the perfect system that he envisions. And it is a perfect system because it's a system in which no one will need to be good or trusted, because that's the definition of a blockchain system. So, the pact with the devil is the origin of all our present strange ideas of algorithmic governance and governance by design or by technology. They come in many shades, but they all try to avoid the spoken and written word for something more powerful. In the case of pacts with the devil, it's always the blood, but in our case, it's signals, data, algorithms, hashes. The task remains the same. It is to make the tedious work of deliberation, negotiation, decision-making faster, easier, more objective, rational. In the case of the blockchains-based smart contracts and other attempts to embed justice directly into the code, this pact with the devil becomes literally true. We give away our control and agency to a more powerful force that knows better how to achieve the goal, but also to define the goal. We sacrifice our future autonomy, or soul, for the immediate power and security of the algorithmic governance that has a form of a magic ritual that we do not really need to understand. We just need to trust these developers, entrepreneurs, visionaries, these modern-day Mephistophelises that provide solutions for everything. The main problem with all pacts with the devil and similar ideas of governance based on technology, and it will be also timekeeping in a moment, you'll see, algorithms, code, data, all these systems in which no one needs to be good or to read or to trust, is that they are just a form of a modern myth. And there is this nice 1957 famous passage from Roland Barthes, who basically calls this the contextualized and depoliticized speech, which makes contingent phenomena appear eternal and natural, necessary, incontestable, outside of politics, basically. And that is the main issue with all pacts with the devil and automated governance. The knowledge and power they promise simply overtake justice. The trade-offs, the victims become invisible, hidden, paradoxical, obfuscated like the wolf in the legend. So for the rest of the talk, I will discuss the victims to show that they are not some simple category that provides a clear recipe for justice, and that it is not enough to say that we are on their side to resolve all the issues with algorithmic governance as this conflict of knowledge, power, and justice. So this is, here's probably the first example of a voice given to a victim of automation. It is a classic 3rd century BC lament over a sundial by a hungry parasite. It's probably our first critique of algorithmic governance and automation. It shares all our present-day anxieties about autonomous and automated systems, such as robots, AIs, destroying human agency, which is expressed here as an empty stomach. The hungry citizens in a city full of sundials also hint at a familiar trope, a smart city embracing a new technology that turns the precarious lives of its inhabitants to worse. So it is this, it's called Hungry Parasite. I'll explain why, where he says, the only sundial was my stomach, and now with all these sundials, I cannot eat when I'm hungry. I have to wait for the right time. And even if there is food, I cannot break that rule. So All these anxieties of automation, such as lack of agency, precarious life, false scarcity, interestingly, and control over quantification are expressed in that quote. Back then, the precarious class consisted of parasites who were the idle poor, although free Roman citizens. They had no income nor work. They frequented public places, ironically together with the sundials, because the sundials were on public places, and in some hope of a dinner at some rich patron's table, who they would entertain or seduce. This gave them their name, parasitos, parasites, literally a person that eats at another's table, denoting a social and economic class that only later acquired the current biological meaning of an organism leeching on another. In the original non-biological meaning, the relation between parasite and host remains ambiguous and problematic. The parasites do not form a functional unit, or what we call body politics, with their host, the patrons. They represent a surplus, a transgression. These victims of Roman globalization and economic inequalities are not heroic nor tragic figures. They're more of a jester figure, even if they hint at many of the issues that we are facing today with the so-called modern precariat, which we are told will be only worse with all the AIs that are taking jobs and so on. This is a quote describing what these parasites were back in Rome. Parasites' resignation and acceptance of being the losers of empire's development and still pursuing a life of leisure and luxury is transgressive, even if it's not political, rebellious, or disobedient per se. They're not political subjects seeking justice and equality, but they're not slaves. They're something of a surplus citizens that manage to get around, survive, and even mock the system, as described in another classic text and critique of timekeeping and technological governance. It's Alciphron's book 3, Letters of Parasites. The two characters, which I'll just translate their name, they're called Dinner Chaser and Dish Crazy, are scheming how to move the pointer of the hateful clock to fool their patron slaves into thinking it is time to eat. We can call them the first hackers. These two parasites are joking about a suicide attempt, like hanging themselves from the sundial to break it, and discuss various impossible ways to bend the pointer so the clock runs faster. Instead of only cursing the clock and its inventor as the parasite from our first quote, they're looking into ways to hack it. The clock represents the rigidity of their patron. His fixation that dinner time happens only at a moment defined by the movement of the sun. The patron, his sundial, and the sun are one, immovable, eternal truth and absolute power, a convergence of technology, science, and politics that no one can question or transform. It is just like the present-day Silicon Valley sundials and their patrons, such as Ethereum and its inventor Vitalik Buterin, who claimed a few years ago that decentralized autonomous organizations are an example of a governance by algorithms that is impossible to cheat. And what happened? Of course, it did have a loophole, and it creates like an interesting case of hacking. So one way to perform justice in all these perfect systems of algorithmic governance is basically to take advantage individually of the loopholes, to become a hacker. But that doesn't give you a real power, nor it really restores justice as some form of a collective action. The forgotten histories of these first actual subjects of governance by technology, the parasite, shows the permanently hungry, nihilistic, and cynical victims of the arbitrary power of a cosmic tool, sundial, and its inventor with no hope of becoming a member of any functional body politics or bending the pointer of the sundial. There is no single social nor technical act or a hack that can solve and improve their situation. And that is exactly what I think we are facing today as a challenge for humanities and design. I think we are like these hungry parasites. The hungry belly satirized the classic unity of purpose in body politics, under which members and parts serve some social and political unity, body either by coordinating as equals or by respecting the hierarchy of the head and the belly. Rather than reproducing this classic fable, these bellies are without a purpose. They are surplus in a world run by sundials. Such reduction of citizens to bellies and parasites without a purpose repeats in every example of algorithmic governance. The present subjects of algorithmic, automated, and so on governance are just actors and agents in a game theory, various simulations and economic models that lack body politics. They are aggregated data and patterns serving in some form of capitalism or neoliberalism. Oops, I have it here. This is like a nice quote from Oudweijer. Rachel Oudweijer wrote a really nice paper on blockchain and governance, and Ruv Roy is a famous author quoted in that paper. She calls them infra-individual data and supra-individual patterns. That's the modern parasites. So there are these parasites on the modern tables of the patrons where they're not even guests. I claim they are served as a menu or data. The automated body politics consists of multiple bellies, is the ultimate resignation of any justice. Its politics revolves around issues of entropy, metabolism, rather than any quest for harmony, unity, mutual support. The challenge of reconciling signals, data, algorithms with politics, history, human experience, and so on is not only about individual hacks and finding the loopholes, but also about this possibility of social action and defining some new body politics. The reason why I don't embrace Moretti's big data humanities nor Manovich's cultural analytics is that they do not offer nor envision any political organization of the surplus citizens under that algorithmic and technological rule. They refuse to reflect the prospects of these new infra and super subjects of future blockchain and so on governance. And that's my invitation, basically. Why you need to join my workshop that is happening on Saturday. It's true. So the challenge of justice in this future of algorithmic governance is to preserve the plurality and openness of collective futures and body politics. But how? One possibility is to start collectively designing and owning the platforms that we use. And this is what platform cooperativism and similar movements are trying to do. So rather than finding loopholes, they're basically trying to reproduce the existing systems and create like a better, like this almost a Marxist way of owning the means of production. In my opinion, these attempts often fail. A good example would be Diaspora that failed against Facebook. But maybe they just need the right support from more stakeholders. And we are seeing this, like Barcelona or Amsterdam are trying to create like such interesting like blockchain platforms and so on. So I'm still open to it and I'm a big fan. My method and path is different. I support collective prototyping of emerging rather than existing platforms. So I engage in something that can be described as anticipatory governance through design. And there you hear, basically, if you're familiar with ASU research and the School of Future of Innovation, this obsession with anticipatory governance comes from there. The goal is to bridge the gap between the prototypes and political and philosophical concepts in that early stage of the technology by collectively working on both, ideally through workshops. The prototypes then help us confront various uncomfortable scenarios about the future and develop a response that anticipates the challenges rather than only reacts. I use my prototypes as tools in these workshops basically I try to involve the others, and you're very welcome on Saturday to join us and experience it directly. It's not intimidating. We will use some code, but it's not the most important part. You will see it. But if I can describe this idea I have about design and humanities, it's basically from this very scientific way of thinking about theory that needs a model or some empirical data for prediction. For me, it's more important that we have a prototype with a theory that invites this participation and seeing ourselves like stakeholders in the future. So just shortly something, do I have time, Brian? I just lost a bit track. Yeah. I'll be quick. So I'll just show you some of the projects. I'm obsessing over these blockchain technologies. This will be the theme of that workshop. We have basically a blockchain smart contract for a so-called smart village of Litopia. You will see why. I will also explain the blockchain technologies, of course, in the workshop, why I'm so interested in them. They're emerging technology, but they're also interesting because they are something like an internet with a history. The time is a very important part of these networks that we are building on the blockchain. So in the smart village, people trigger different transactions like changing of ownership through gestures or through doing certain form of like a land art type of performances in front of satellites. So basically I connected satellite data with these blockchain technologies to think about this near future scenario. I think it was actually the first contract created with satellite data. So I should have had like a startup or something. And it's really funny to see some of these professionals, how they react to it. Like, why did you do it? Like, what you're trying to disrupt? So it's just like this strange scenario that is engaging, and you will become villagers in this smart village where everything happens in front of satellites, and you will have to rethink the regulation of these technologies through a very guided process. And the workshop can be from 2 hours to whoever wants to stay longer, we can like continue. Now, it's also part of my research because I'm actually interested with this idea that if you engage people through prototypes, you can prepare some interesting scenarios. So it's also like helping a Marie Curie researcher, a desperate one. Okay, so these are some of the activities I have. It's all kinds of tools. I'll just maybe show some of it. Yeah. There is like this dashboard of all Ethiopians that connects different data that helps me explain you how the blockchain actually works. And this is me actually testing a contract that I created. So I have a contract where if I put a 10 by 10 meters of red cloth on a certain location at a certain time when the satellite sees it, I can change symbolically the owner of that place, just on my blockchain. So it's a form like a land art thing. Okay, this time it failed, but at least I have the picture. It failed because I couldn't create the 10 by 10 meters. It was too windy. So future Lithopians will have all kinds of challenges. There are 2 more contracts that I'm kind of working with. One is using the famous Merchant of Venus, Shakespeare's play, and I'm trying to take that contract from Shakespeare and turn it into a blockchain contract, maybe about biological data. I'm trying to play with this idea of biological data and this impossible contract from Shakespeare. That didn't develop much, but it's one of these contracts. And the last one is Aspasia smart contract, which was probably this code. I didn't program the code. I was working with the developer. And it was an interesting idea of creating something like a death switch. Like I was interested in a contract that will use my data. So when I stop breathing, it will basically trigger a contract on the Ethereum platform that will read Aspasia dialogue, which is a very famous, like not famous, but an interesting dialogue. It's a Menexenus dialogue from Plato, and it is about what is an appropriate way. It's a bit of like an ironic funeral speech by Plato, and it is very much about the origin of philosophy, where he discusses power of words, myth, rhetoric, that describes the deeds of the dead soldiers, and some interesting like polemic against like what is philosophy and what is this traditional way of commemorating them. And then I wanted to introduce this issue, okay, and what about these hashes and packets that are triggering insurance policies or smart contracts? How do they fit into this like tradition? So these are some of the examples. Please support me, come to my workshop. It will be fun. It's very guided. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. And I promise you'll learn something about blockchain technologies, and maybe you will move to Silicon Valley and start something.
Okay. Wow. Thank you, Denisa. We've got a couple minutes, so questions, comments, discussion.
Thank you for this talk on blockchain. I was very curious to learn about this new technology that everybody has been talking about. My question is about labor and race, because I was struck that your talk had a lot of underpinnings in labor and labor activism and class. And I think you said that you didn't agree with Moretti and Manovich because they don't envision political organization by the underclass, so to say. But I'm curious about where race enters that conversation with labor. What are the possibilities for racial justice with blockchain, or what are the limitations for seeking racial justice in this technology?
So, to be honest, I think it will obliterate all of us. So, you know, in a moment where it will take all our jobs, it will not matter. Maybe it will even create some strange form of equality, because, you know, like if it will take the jobs of everyone. So I don't know how would I address the issue of race. In terms of, it's interesting that the development of these technologies is not happening only in the West. It's actually one of these rare cases where the most interesting functional projects that are even maybe doing something good, I'll try to defend them, are in Brazil. Strangely, in places like favelas or places with no infrastructure where people have to travel, 3 hours to pay their bills. I've seen like 3 projects from Brazil that are doing exactly that. Strangely, they're run by women entrepreneurs. So, you know, they have all this like positive like story. So I see actually even examples where it kind of helps, or at least in Brazil, it feels like something positive is happening around these blockchain technologies, that they did find a market or a society that where it's like a meaningful use for payments, micropayments, microloans, and for now at least it looks positive. But in the future, I really think by all these technologies overtaking our jobs and, you know, making us meaningless in the same way as these Roman parasites became meaningless, I actually see as a bad future for all of us.
Thank you. This is a great talk. I really appreciate it. So I have a question about the contract with the devil. It seems that every time we use that phrase, it's not about a specific instance, but rather a commentary on the human condition, that at any kind of progress that we ever make is a bet, right? And we don't know where it's going to go. And so we have contract with electricity before we even knew how it worked. We have a contract with, pulleys before we even understood the mechanisms underlying physics and all that stuff. And so it seems to me that we're always dealing with opaque systems, and we just take the bet. And so it's just the human condition. So I wonder what you would say is new about these technologies that we didn't have when we were making pacts with the devil on electricity and or other things.
So I was actually trying to make the opposite point, that it's nothing new, that all these issues we have with algorithmic governance, making parasites, making us useless, basically, in like having these like dreams that it's not going to be that bad, even if we make like some trade-offs. These are very like old dreams. And actually I have a paper which is linked in the presentation, which is much more going into these genealogical issues. Klepsydra is actually, the water clock is mentioned in the paper. I didn't have time to use it here, but I actually don't feel anything is really new. Do you think algorithmic governance? I wouldn't say it's like a human nature. It's just like certain type of issues which we are in a situation where we can, like I'm upset with situations like with Gmail or Facebook. Regulation and policy always comes too late and does too little. And then you have Mark Zuckerberg just saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was going to happen. What he does next, he creates Libra, which is this cryptocurrency that can really like crush a lot of economies and make it even more impossible to pay taxes and all this. So, he's not really sorry. And so I'm thinking, what would be like, can we do something to anticipate, to be ahead of these like technologies? So for me, the issue is not, okay, let's recreate Facebook or recreate some technologies that are already like corporate and it's hard to beat them. But why not be at the start of these like promissory new technologies and try to involve like more stakeholders, try to think about the regulation earlier? I guess that's more like what I'm trying to achieve. Because I think it will always be the same if we just leave it to Silicon Valley to define our future. Because at the end, it is about the future. I see ourselves as stakeholders in the future and not as users of some future technologies. And I feel like we don't have the tools to define what are these stakes in our future, because we always wait something to come from Silicon Valley or from somewhere.
I was thinking of comparing the Pact with the Devil with Pandora's box, for example. And I was also wondering about your definition of parasite. I thought that was from the Greeks, so the Greeks had similar wide range of characters for entertainment, etc.
Yes.
For philosophy, poetry, whatever, dance, music. So like parasites includes things in the biological sense of symbiosis, maybe living together, or from the Latin commensal at the same table, and they're not all pathogenic. Some of them are mutually beneficial, so it's a wide range of possibilities. And so in a sense, even Socrates and Plato were parasites, right? And they, one of them gets accused of corrupting the youth by teaching them the wrong question and making them cynical and giving them religious disbelief.
I'm definitely for using like more metaphors that will create some new, let's say, images of what this political unity in an age of algorithmic governance can look like. Maybe it can be symbiosis, or, question is, do we need these biological metaphors? How these political metaphors influence the biological? And we need to be very self-reflective and careful about it. So I agree, like I'm not against it. This was more to, the reason I decided to use the parasite is, again, to show that it's an old problem, and also that it's not just about empathizing with the parasites, that we are kind of losing any form of a politics or any form of a goal, any form of a reason to do some form of a social action. Or that's the situation I feel we are now. We are giving up on our data, basically, to Facebook, Gmail, and so on. And then, of course, they will be fined by EU or US, and what? Like, they're continuing their businesses, nothing changes. I'm very, dissatisfied with this. And I don't think it's enough just to say, oh, I'm on their sites, and now something will change. We really need to own the tools, and question is, which tools? The ones that exist? I think no. We need to be ahead of the entrepreneurs. And the reason, maybe this is more important why I have these weird ideas. Most of my research is about maker spaces and hacker spaces. So to be honest, maybe my attitude was influenced by seeing these people that create communities around prototypes. And it's not just a Western phenomenon. Most of my research was in Indonesia and countries around Singapore where I used to live. So these places influence my idea that yes, it is possible to democratize technologies. People create all kinds of their own small spaces around tinkering with something and so on.
I think we have time for one more question. I think it's interesting that you are talking about maker spaces and things like that sort of being sources of research for you. And a lot of what you're talking about here seems to be about anticipating new possibilities rather than recreating our own democratic versions of old possibilities. And I'm wondering if there's, with the sort of maker spaces and hacker spaces in mind, I wonder if there's any place for recreating and repurposing old things for new purposes in this system that you're proposing?
I mean, absolutely, that's one of the favorite activities in some of the hacker spaces. They create looms or some old technologies. So if you go to CCC, which is this annual event of people interested in these movements, you will see all kinds of coexisting like media and technologies, like old telephone systems, some old GSM signal, like local mobile networks. So they're hacking and playing with all these technologies. So it's nothing, again, repurposing the old technology, which are obsolete maybe now, and somehow preserving some autonomy this way. I just, for me, it's like this is like a 2 years research I'll do about the blockchain to see, okay, can I involve people that know nothing about it into like these futures, and how will they see this future? The most interesting question is, of course, regulation and policy, because in EU we have all these AI ethics calls and manifests, and there are all kinds of institutions. There are calls to create something like FDA for algorithms. So I'm interested in these regulatory possibilities through these workshops, like how normal people that can play a role of a stakeholder react to it.
We are a few minutes over time, so I think I'm going to thank Denisa for this thought-provoking talk, and if your head is spinning as much as mine, you can continue.